There we go. For those of you who don't know, I am Bex. I'm the program director of Pivot Point WNC. Unfortunately, our executive director is on the road, so he can't be here, but he wishes all of you thanks for coming. And we're just so excited to have Philip Cooper and Dan Pizzo here for this conversation. They are some powerhouses in the field, and the whole intention of this monthly conference series is to showcase wise people who know what they're talking about and have dialogues around as many topics as we can cover. And this is an especially important one. So we are honored to have you guys here and just appreciate that you're taking the time to do this right now. So I will pass that off to you two.
Cool. Coop, you want me to go and then you to go, or you want to go? I hate following you.
Yeah, I mean, it's
easy to follow me.
You can go first, bro.
Cool. I like how you use the word wise, because to me, like intelligence and wisdom are two different things. Wisdom is, I think, for me, admitting I don't really know very much, or maybe anything at all for that matter. So like Philip and I talked a little bit earlier today, and you know, like we want to speak from the wise heart, right? We want to speak in the moment, we want to be present. And I think for me, if I speak for too long, I start thinking I'm a bit clever, or if it goes wrong, I start thinking other things in the opposite direction. So we're going to talk like just kind of briefly to introduce like who we are, what we've done, and our experience, a little bit about our experience, and then just open it up pretty quickly for dialogue, right? So you can ask specific questions for us to go in, you know, a little bit more in depth about something. For example, you could challenge something, right? Or you could ask, or you could share a little bit of your experience, you know, working in a system, in systems that, you know, are difficult to negotiate. So as we share kind of our stories, like feel free to like, you know, write something down, think of questions, and know that that section will come relatively quickly. And I think for the CEUs, we have to talk for like 30 minutes each or something, and we'll definitely talk for 30 minutes each. It'll just be about what you want to hear about rather than what we think you need to hear about or want to hear about. Does that make sense? And I love that I can see people's faces, and you know, if you're doing other things, that's fine. Like I don't want you to pressure you to put your camera on, but at least we can see a few, because that thing I don't like about virtual stuff is that you can't really read the room. So this makes it a little bit easier. And if you want to chime in and interrupt, definitely while I'm talking, feel free. That's great. So I'm Dan, and like my bio said, this was actually the first time in a bio that I put Dan is a parent in long-term recovery as the first thing on there. Because right now I'm a free agent. I don't work for nobody. And so that's really cool. And in my most recent experience, I couldn't say that, or I didn't feel that I could say that and not kind of have to watch my back a little bit. So that feels liberating. At the same time, like, I don't know where my boundary is. I talked to Philip, I talked to Matt about this actually when he posted on Facebook my bio. I was like, can you take it down for a minute? I just need to, I'm like, you know, I don't want to not offend, but I don't want to offend and close doors either. So yeah, I'm Dan, and I'm in long-term recovery. I would say I'm an antagonist in long-term recovery. So I like to challenge, and I'm learning how to challenge better and better, especially systems that oppress. In fact, I'm taking some classes right now to learn the system a little bit better, so that I can have as much impact as I can, as long as I'm having fun. And I've been in the field for about 16 years. And my recovery journey began in 2013. So if you're any good at math, I've been in the helping field for 16 and started in 2013. So I was an impaired professional for a little while. And, you know, that is not a thing I would generally share. You know, there's some shame around that, I think. And there's some like, oh, what did you do? But I think that, you know, today I can see that like part of that experience gave me a glimpse that I wouldn't have otherwise had. So half of kind of my, you know, helping professional life was helping and serving the homeless in different communities around the world, but mainly outside of DC. And then the later half was in this county, working in child protective services, so serving the underserved, the homeless, and then, you know, at CPS, Child Protective Services, you know, serving parents that were so jammed up that they struggled to parent well, right? That had so many barriers in front of them, or, you know, struggling with life. And, you know, again, just to not talk for too long so that we can open it up. I think, you know, in the first half of my experience, I think one of the things that, as I reflect on it today, that I took away was that it was hard to serve when you were running away from yourself, right? So I think there was a system of oppression that was going on within me, right? It still does. Like, I think we probably all to some degree struggle with a system of oppression for us, within ourselves. And so the way that I think I did that was distance myself with knowledge from the clients that I served, right? So, I mean, I even went to, you know, start doing a master's in social work. And I think in order to not face myself, what I was doing was I was trying to learn as much as possible up here, because I couldn't accept who I was down here, right? And what I'm saying is I'm not saying, oh, I wish I would have shared that I was struggling and, you know, I was doing this, that, and the other, you know, that, but I didn't acknowledge it even to myself at that time. And hopefully, I don't know, I mean, I can still relate to that internally. Like, in order to be fully present with who I'm serving, I need to acknowledge and know who I am in the moment. And if I don't, I think there's a barrier. And what I often see, and what I've done in the past, and probably will do when I kind of fall asleep to it, is I'll place myself on a pedestal of knowledge, right, to do that. And then it's not an equal playing field, because then we're not two humans sitting in a room. I'm trying to be up here, and there's no way to really serve, because all I can do is give here, I can't receive, and that's not a real experience. And then, you know, in my most recent experience, so I came to Asheville, and I was, you know, I mean, early recovery, but not too early. Hopefully this isn't inappropriate, but, you know, and I don't know, does anyone have a problem if a cuss word comes out? We're all adults. You had to be 18 to be here, right? Okay. I don't know if I'm going to drop a cuss word now, but if I do, I'll feel better about it. So it's kind of like coming up on Molly. I feel like early recovery a little bit is horrible to begin with. You like feel like, oh, you know, I feel terrible. And then you're like wanting to hug everyone when you start rolling. Right. And so I came to Asheville, and I was like rolling on recovery, right? Like I was like, yeah, you know, like I love this. This is so great. And luckily for me, I was in touch with enough kind of helping professionals in the field who had a lot more experience in the field, including like, you know, therapists, professors, you know, doctors, who said, Dan, hold back. What's important is that you work your program and you acknowledge your recovery for you right now, but there's this thing called stigma, right? When you're rolling, you're not that thinking clearly, right? And I was kind of rolling on my recovery, and so I held it in, and it gave me a really interesting glimpse into, you know, an oppressive system. I don't think anyone would argue that child welfare is an oppressive system. But what I started to see was people talking about people like me, right? And there was like two kind of faces of stigma that stood out to me. On the one hand, there was the face of stigma that was maybe the better end of stigma, where people talked about people as though they were so vulnerable, and, you know, they could break at any minute, you know, not with kind of seeing the power that was there, right? and I was feeling full of power. So I had that glimpse that, you know, that was one of the faces. Or, you know, the other face, which is the more common face, I think, is that people would outright talk about people who are struggling with active use in really belittling terms when they weren't there, right? They might have been great in the front lines, but when they weren't there, I got to see that, right? And of course, like, I'd lost my ability to judge, because even though I was an impaired professional that was highly functional at times, I was part of a deviant class, right? Like, I was involved in, you know, hospitalized many times, all that stuff. Like, but there was some really dark times. And so I couldn't judge, but at the same time, again, talking about serving the underserved, like recognizing that I'm white, I'm a man, and that I have to top that off, I have a British accent in the States, right? So like, I can pretty much get away with murder around here. I mean, I haven't yet. I haven't, and I don't plan to. But what I'll say is that I was part of a deviant class for a while, but I could climb out pretty much anytime I wanted. And so I was really never underserved. And so the people that I was interfacing with in the front lines, you know, I could recognize that a lot of them had barriers that I just didn't even know how to aim to negotiate. And so that gave me an even different level of kind of desire to kind of understand that and what that was like, and listen, really, because I didn't know. And so anyway, I mean, like, again, you know, that's where I spent kind of 8 years. My most recent experience, you know, and some people know this about me, was, you know, helping to pioneer kind of a new way of doing business within an oppressive system that was very, very different, you know, serving families that struggle with substance use and the co-occurrence of child maltreatment, basically struggling to parent. And one of the things that was very, very different, and that was actually really encouraging, was that we showed that we could step off the pedestal by owning our lived experience, whether some of us owned it out loud, which I didn't in the front lines as much, or whether by hiring people that could, that knew what that very system felt like, and what, you know, who were in long-term recovery, who could kind of bridge that gap and see clients kind of face to face. And we did really, really different work. I mean, we saw families stay together that wouldn't have generally stayed together, not by telling them what to do, but by being there for them as other human beings walking this journey alongside with them, and eventually actually letting them lead, but not separating them as well. And so that to me was amazing. And what I found is that, like, the underserved generally don't have the ability to mobilize. They don't have the ability to kind of fight back, to be honest. And I think the system knows that. And so it tends to socially control, right? Like, even in serving them, I think sometimes it falls short, or systems in general. And in part, I think because there's not many people fighting to change that. And so I think that's where the power of, like, people with lived experience, and I'm not just talking about recovery lived experience, I'm talking about who can acknowledge that life is hard, right? And that might mean that, like, today, acknowledging that life is hard is acknowledging that, you know, I mean, this didn't happen, by the way, today anyway. Like, I had a horrible fight with my wife or something, or my kids are driving me crazy, or like, I don't know if I'm going to make ends meet, you know, and not sharing that necessarily, but also owning that for myself when I walk into a room and serve someone else, knowing that I don't know very much. I might know a lot up here, but like down here, I don't. So anyway, those are just some, there's so much more that I'd like to share, and I could share, but I'd like to see what others want. And so, Philip, I think I gave you a pretty easy lead to follow. Take it away, mate.
Right on. Yeah, so I was excited when I seen the title, you know, and I'm glad there wasn't any questions or anything, because I like to really speak from the heart. especially with something concerning the underserved. The underserved needs real. They need real more than ever right now. Marginalized communities need real more than ever right now. George Floyd, that situation revealed a lot of things to some folks. Some people already was well aware. What was it? The county declared racism a public health crisis. So a lot of things start happening different than what it was before. And so now that things are different, I feel like people need the real more than ever now. And so as far as oppressive systems that I've worked in, before I get into talking about working inside the system, I do want to say how I experienced the actual oppression myself, once I turned my life around. Everything prior to when I turned my life around, I could easily blame it on poverty. I could blame it on the community. I could blame it on a lot of things, but I'm just going to own up to everything I've done, committing the crimes, joining the gang, all the things I've done prior to going to prison. I'm gonna own up to it, and so my story is gonna start post incarceration. You dig? So when I got out of prison, well, first off, when I was in prison was when I first got my experience as a peer support. That's why I've been fighting for peer support before there was grant money for peer support. I was fighting for peer support. You dig? And I was what we call a peer counselor on the inside of the prison for a program called A New Direction. And it's under the Hazelden umbrella, formerly known as DART. I don't know if anybody in here has ever been to prison or worked inside a prison, but they had a program called DART. Jordan Danner works for the New Direction program inside the prison. So that program he's working for now is a program that I was a peer counselor for whenever I was in prison. And so that's when my peer support first started. So I done well in there, you feel me? And when I got out, I was like, the counselors in there, they have licensed clinicians running the program, LCAS, CCS, all the things, right? And one of them, his name was Henry Parks. He's retired from the Division of Public Safety. And he was like, young blood, when you get out of here, you better go get your credential because you got the juice. He that's how he talked. Older black guy from the eastern part of the state. So when I got out, I said, what, I'm finna become a counselor. Let's go. This is one of the more forgiving fields, you dig? And so I was working at Neil Darvin Center, and I got ready to go get my stuff in order. And then I ran straight into an oppressive system in which the charges that I had said that you could not even get registered with the board. You dig? Like it said, you couldn't get registered with the board for back then. This was before the policy changes to the occupational licensing boards. Back then, it was like I had to wait 10 years to even get registered with the board. And so because I have violent felony and I had a high level drug charge, so I couldn't get registered with the board. That was my first experience with the oppressive system. And I was doing the work. I was a case manager at Neil Darvin Center. Everybody surrounding me had credentials, whether they were, back then it was CSAC. Now it's CAD-C. But back then, I was surrounded. It was a guy named Danny Lubavitch that was there. Lori, I forget Lori's last name, Lori Green. Allie, I forget Allie's last name. She was Cherokee, but I was surrounded by counselors. I was the only one that didn't have a credential. That was my first experience with oppression. And I burned out though, like working in the field, because I had that cape on. I know in school they taught us about self-care and never work harder than the client, all the things they teach. But man, I was just want to save the world, and I'm still like that. Like they say, you can't burn the candle from both ends. Like I've had people telling me the same thing for a long time. I'm just the kind of guy like burn it down, burn the house down. If I'm saving people, to burn me down, because my Savior Jesus Christ died for me. So if I'm mimicking him and I'm giving it up for the people, then I feel like I'm doing what I can do and I can sleep at night. But I ended up burning out, and I left Neil Darvin Center. You know what I'm saying? And I want to say it was oppressive working for like a state-funded treatment center because the lack of resources that were available. You dig? Like I remember, it's probably like that still. It's like, so I'm working on discharge planning for somebody. There is no beds available at any other the state-funded facilities. You dig? So you're gonna discharge them with an outpatient appointment to wait to go inpatient. That's backward as hell. You go outpatient and then you go inpatient. If you can do that, hell, you don't need inpatient. And so that was some of the things that I had to see, and that was very oppressive for folks. Like I seen people going back to that were like survivors of domestic violence, and they was choosing to go back to places where there was harm being done because they couldn't get into treatment after the fact. So the lack of resources, you did. That was hard, and I ended up burning out. So I went to go work at the college. When I went to work at the college, it was a new experience for me. But we all know there's definitely oppression in the educational system, especially in Western North Carolina. And so like I was seeing the lack of diversity, you feel me, and that was inside the college. And so a lot of times things were funneling to me because, I was one of the few black faces in student services. And I want to save everybody. So if somebody asks me help, I don't care what I'm doing. If you say help to me and I can help you, I am going to help you. You feel me? If I get in trouble, I deal with that later, but I'm finna see you go in the enrollment lab and make sure you understand how to knock out your financial aid application. I can get back to that little spreadsheet later, you dig? Especially when it's like black folks that was coming into the college, because Lord knows, it was a lot of people that at that time they didn't understand. They didn't understand the power of the community college. That's why I still promote the community college. I just did a post yesterday, or was that this morning, about the community college. You did. And so whenever there were black folks that were coming, I felt like I had to cater to whatever their needs for it were, because so many people was just unaware of the offerings at the community college. They looked at the community college as less than, and so many other things. But so I started having to educate people. I started doing like the recruiting. I would go inside the prisons. You know what I'm saying? They started allowing me to do things, but when it was time to move up, I couldn't move up. Boom, there go that oppression. You did. The way that it's lined up, like the minimum education requirements for a person to move into certain positions. You did. That's oppressive. You know what I'm saying? Some people didn't have the privilege to just keep going to college and going to college and going to college. I was a first generation college student. And so there was positions that I couldn't even apply for, that I'd be doing the work for, that I couldn't apply for because I didn't have a certain degree. That was oppressive. But while I worked at the college, I ended up getting a promotion. I transitioned over to workforce development, and by this time, I'm a peer support specialist, still working part-time. I was working at Next Step Recovery. I've been rocking with Next Step for a long time, you dig? And I was still doing my work with SUD, because it's hard to leave from SUD all the way when you once you get a taste of it. Like even a lot of my friends that are clinicians, if they leave a job, they go to another job still doing SUD work, just with a different kind of population. And even if they do try something totally different, they still like do a couple of clients that they'll see, because it's rewarding work. You know what I'm saying? My job ain't my recovery, but it's rewarding work. So anyway, I get in workforce development, and I mess around and get a job working inside the courthouse. So listen, I'm working inside the courthouse, and it was traumatizing every time I come in there, because like some of the police that will be at the front, they be looking at me all funny, because I'm coming in with my little badge. You know what I'm saying? I kind of felt good to have my little county badge on and showing it like, yeah, but then someone would be looking at me all funny and whispering, yeah, and I'm sitting here trying to help people. I'm trying to help people navigate the community college system from inside the JRC, you dig? But when I'm coming to work, I'm feeling like I'm being bullied, like I was when I was in high school. When I was in high school, and I go to a football game, and it's in Owen, and I go on the visiting side because I'm dating somebody from that school, and it ain't no black folks over there, and I see the group of the rednecks looking at me like whispering. That's how it felt when I was coming into the courthouse. And so, boom, I continue to hold my head, leveraging my recovery piece. And that's why I salute Dan, because like Dan had to navigate. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff you ain't say, but like everywhere I done worked at, I've been able to let people know straight up, like I'm a person in recovery. You know what I'm saying? You see my past, but because with HR, a lot of times, if you do get a job and you got a messed up record, you got to be able to speak to what has changed in your life. You dig? So a lot of times, whenever I would meet with HR, one of the things I would talk about is like, I'm in recovery now. Most of the people I hang with, they don't use no drugs or alcohol. I mentor people. I would break it down so the folks I would be working with, they already know what type of time I'm on. You dig? But with Dan, he had to keep it on the low, like, and be working inside a system with it on the low. See, I ain't never had that experience, but like when I was working in the JRC, I had to really, really leverage those relationships I had in recovery, because like it was hard, yo. And I'm a person with lived experience. See, the way that the system is structured, it don't really acknowledge the lived experience as much as it does the degrees, you dig? I might not got a master's degree, but I got a degree from the master. I done been a service recipient, and I've been a service provider in workforce development, in reentry, in Department of Health and Human Services, in housing, and all of that stuff. So now I bring a different thing to the table, right? Being able to see the gaps. So I'm working at JRC, and I'm coming with these ideas. Ain't nobody want to hear nothing I had to say. Ain't nobody want to hear. What is it? Because of how I talk? Is it? You know what I'm saying? So I'd be going off in there, and it was hard. You feel me? And it was so hard to where I stopped going. I just stopped going. I mean, and this is public information. I share my story. I get paid to tell my story, and this is so. If anybody on here is plugged in, I don't mind. Like some dude was on here talking about JR. I don't mind. Like I don't mind. And so, like when I was there, I was the same stuff that I'm getting awards for, grants for now. The same ideas. Those are the same ideas I was talking about then that nobody wanted to listen to. So I went and did it myself. In 2020, I was the MLK speaker for the march. The name of my speech was Do It Yourself, because it got to the point to where I was coming with these ideas. Nobody wanted to listen. And I was so close to the community and so close to the resources, it was mandatory that I become a bridge. It was mandatory that I become a bridge, or I wouldn't have had peace. And so I did it. I prayed. I took care of my recovery, you know, because at the end of the day, it ain't because Philip is so special. I believe that God uses me. You did. And so once that started happening, I stopped going. Then my program blew up, but then it was right back to like working for the community college as this grassroots level leader who was an activist, who was on the Second Chance Alliance, who was a part of Forward Justice, who was rocking with Van Jones's Cut 50. You know what I'm saying? It's just so many things, and you're working inside the academia. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going in meetings and people saying stuff, and I'm usually the only person that'll call something out. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'll say it, and you want to talk about the oppressive side of the system. Check this out. How about being in a meeting and you calling something out and you feel like, you know, already the angry black man, whatever, and you calling it out and nobody don't say nothing. Then when the meeting is over, somebody come up to you and be like, man, I'm so glad you said that, man. Keep speaking truth to power. In my mind, I'm like, damn, why you ain't have my back when I was in the meeting looking like a crazy one? But that's another part of the oppressive system, because at the end of the day, when you work inside the system, it ain't but so much that you can say. You don't want to lose your job. You did, because you got to take care of your kids. And so people, you know, I'm praying for you. Like if you're working inside that system and you agree that the system is oppressive, I'm praying for you. Hit me in the chat. I'll pray for you individually. You did? Because at the end of the day, like you're going to have a war inside your mind and inside your heart, because you know the system is broken. You know that it's oppressive, and that's where you work at. That's got to be a hard place to be. But you got to have your bills paid. And I've been there before. You did? So now where I'm at with things, you know, like I'm working at the Wyoming Cultural Center. You know, I've been able to make some state level connections as well as regional connections. What I've learned is like some of the work that I'm doing now ain't even, it's not Buncombe County focused. I've been able to just like what LeBron say, I took my talents to South Beach. You know, I've been able to help some of my rural folks that don't know a lot about peer support, that don't know nothing about community health worker, that don't know about Medicaid billable services, that don't know about, you know, culturally aligned this and that. So I took my stuff where people could get it, and I'm still able to help some folks in Buncombe. But if they don't want to listen and they don't want to value me, then fine. I'm from here. I'm gonna be here regardless. I ain't got to do no work inside the system. Period. I've been able to help way more people since I left than I was ever able to help when I was there. So much red tape. And I'm so glad, like, at the end of the day, that y'all was willing to even have this session. You feel me? That was bold. Well, y'all counselors, y'all good. Y'all ain't never got to worry about getting jobs. People with credentials and stuff, you know, it's a demand for y'all anyway. But I'm still appreciative of you being willing to have this type of session. Because typically, you know, people don't be willing to speak out about this. And, you know, and I ain't going to ask bro to speak, but so much on his situation. You did? Because when we talked before, I told him, like, bro, I'm a whole live activist. You did? Like, we just got fit of the firefighters' living wages. You did? That's who I am as a person. You know, everybody ain't got to do that because you don't want to sabotage. Me, at the end of the day, I would never fit in the system anyway. I mean, just being real, I would never fit in there. You know what I'm saying? For one, I ain't trying to tuck my shirt in. For two, you know what I'm saying? I'm tired of code, so I'm over. Code switching is over. Them days are over. I was with Christy Puckett Williams. We was bailing people out, the Juneteenth bailout, which was on Saturday, the day before Father's Day. ACLU, that was down here, you feel me? And we was bailing people out. And one of the things that Christy Puckett Williams said, she was like, bro, you don't need the code switch. That's what's wrong with the system now. And that's what's wrong with us, because we trying to fit into something that was never created for us in the first place. Yeah. So I ain't even on that code switching no more, because I used to try it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, sure. Man, damn that. You know what I'm saying? My people been getting killed by y'all. You feel me? This broken system been killing us. You did? Meanwhile, the younger white folks are the ones that's really about change anyway. And I'm sitting here trying to fit in with, some folks just need to retire. At the end of the day, like, for the system to get better, there are some people that's just going to have to retire. There's and then let me talk about the workforce development piece, as far as the oppression that I've seen with the workforce development piece. In my experience in workforce development, I've seen up here a booming advanced manufacturing sector that makes really good money, right? I've seen how the community college has certain trainings that you can take, short-term job trainings that can get a person a good paying job in a short amount of time, y'all. I'm talking maybe 6 months, and you going in making $16 to $18 an hour. You dig? That's like what, 34 to about 37 a year. You did, coming out with a BSW. That's what you make. Y'all know what time it is. So with these short-term job trainers, but a lot of times the companies, they'll hire the white guys and then they'll send them to the class. For the black folks, they can't get the job, so they basically have to pay to go to the class and use they got to have disposable time to go and take the training off the clock. That's another piece that I'm trying to address now. So please don't think I'm just complaining, because at the Wine Cultural Center, we have made some strong connections, and we have been building capacity for job trainings and stipends. You feel me? Because a lot of people like to talk about equity. I don't let people just say equity. Equity means leveling the playing field. It don't mean giving everybody the same thing. It don't mean the same. You did? So that's where I'm at with surviving in the oppressive systems. You know what I'm saying? From the occupational licensing boards to the academia, to working for the criminal justice system, to workforce development. Those are all oppressive systems that I had to navigate while serving the underserved.
Amazing. I wanted to make a comment, Coop, on what you said about, if you're working in the system, right? Because I recognize that there are systems that are built to help navigate the oppressive systems, right? I think every system, no system is perfect. And then saying kind of like, and there's a comment about kind of code switching and who's ready to have kind of that conversation anyway. And I can make a couple of comments on that, but I think my reflection was, like when I was in the system, like I had to connect really hard with people outside of the system in order to carry on, and ultimately, like I felt rejected by the system, which is fine, because like in order to maintain my integrity, I didn't want to become systemized, right? Like I've been saying the same thing for a long time, and I think it's sad if you start to switch that. Stability, financial stability is certainly important, but it's not everything. And I think to me, I had to make that decision that, it was time for me to leave, and it was time for me to start flexing from the outside. But the other thing that really stood out to me as well was the thing about diplomacy, really, like, if you're the only one speaking up, and people are like, yeah, go on, but they're doing it quietly under the table, and then they come to you out afterwards, right? Like that's another huge challenge that I think, I faced. I'm sure many of you have faced that too. How do you get your message across? And I mean, this is related to code switching as well. Like, how do you get your message across while not dumbing it down so that it loses its truth, And I think ultimately, like, the solution is always relational and connection, right? Like, and I think that's in part like why Pivot Point's putting on these talks, is like to connect. And so, like, you know, I'm outside of the system right now, and you know, I'd be glad to listen, to give you a good listening to, and maybe continue to share experience if you're having that experience, because it's not easy. And I don't think I would have stayed as long if it wasn't for people like Coop, who I'd call, and you know, sometimes we go for a rage walk and just kind of talk about, like, hey, you know, this is what's happening, it's not right. You know, how can I maintain my integrity and continue to fight it, but actually have impact, you know, rather than close the door. And sometimes the door needs to be closed, but sometimes if you can leave it open enough and get your message across and get enough people pushing on it, then, you know, there's a solution there. You know, and as far as, well, I mean, it's not really code switching, but maybe kind of tone policing. You know, what I often saw is that, you know, the forms and the system itself, like, for example, I mean, like, a lot of the state forms, right, that are antiquated and you know, like, really built in white supremacy culture. You know, many of them are many pages long. And we try and kind of like make them as palatable as possible for the clients that we're serving. But I don't understand why we're not just throwing them in the trash, right? And actually asking the questions that matter. You know, so many times, you know, even in the front lines, it was so easy for things to become a checklist. It was so easy for me to forget, like, what I was doing, which was like trying to kind of listen and help motivate and mobilize, like, because I had like, oh, you know, I need to see this person needs to do this, that person needs to do that. And what happens is that little by little, Dan is going out of the picture and a machine is stepping in, right? And you know, at the end of the day, my numbers might look good, you know, when I get back to the office, but what's the worth, you know, of that? I'm not saying that, you know, some kind of organization around the work and some like good policies to protect relationships, you know, don't make sense sometimes. I think that they do, but I think oftentimes we get lost in, you know, the structure and the institutionalism of this work and forget who we are.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in right there too, Dan. Like, and just speaking of like the peer support workforce, just speaking on the peer support workforce, you know, I've been around for a while, you know, and I've seen how peer support has evolved. I've seen how it has been used in unique situations that I didn't agree with. But I would say that peer support shouldn't even be working inside the system, period. Like, peer support should work for peer-led organizations. Because at the end of the day, HR ain't gonna ask you nothing about your recovery. But peers, that's all we talk about. How many meetings you make this week? You called your sponsor. Who you know that's sponsoring people right now? I know this young dude, he need a sponsor right now. We talk, that's our life. That's what qualifies us. But when you work for the system, you got to be careful. You can't just be talking about it. So now you're feeling like you don't belong. You did. You don't know if you really fit in. But what they hired you for was to be who you are, and now you don't feel like you fit in. So that's immediate confusion. So you either pick a side or you stay confused. And the longer you stay confused, the less ineffective you are to do the work that you was called to do based off of who you are. Because now you don't even know who the hell you are no more. And I've seen that happen, especially when people start working inside the system. You know, and it ain't, and the system is needed. Like there's no shade. Like, we need governmental jobs to do, you know, certain jobs, you know, but peer support in itself is not meant to be put in a box. It's meant to be innovative. It's meant to work outside of regular job hours. That's what we do, you know? And so, like, that's one of the things that I'm wanting to raise more awareness about, but like, I can't do it the way I want to, because there are some, you know, because the system is supporting a lot of peer support. What they and now they're in a unique position because they can't call it out. Hell, if you paying me, what I ain't finna say, I ain't gonna say but so much.
There's the problem. There's the problem though. It's not about whether or not, right? Welcome to the conversation for but I think this is really important. I think right now, I think you're right. I think it's a damn shame if there wasn't the opportunity for people with lived experience, whether like to not only work within the system, but help shape the system, right? Unfortunately, that's an unrealistic goal right now, I think. Or maybe I'm just a cynic. But I think what what you're talking about is that there's no one that understands peer support, or there are a few people that understand peer support that are able to support peer support within the system right now, right? Because it can happen and it can happen well. But unfortunately, the block is that there's a ceiling that you reach, right? Which is, again, not a dignifying thing, right? Like you talked about this a lot, like there's this education thing, right? that stands in the way, or the criminal record, or the fact that it's not necessary all the time. Like I think there's a lot that can come from a good education, right? But like it's not necessary for everyone who is in leadership to have the same academic perspective. In fact, I would say that like my biggest hope, for this community, right, like where I live, is that like the clients that were once served by whatever organization would be the ones that wouldn't just be giving feedback and working in the front line and being thanked and like paid poorly, like, but they would actually be at the highest. I don't really believe in hierarchical structures, but that's what exists mostly, like that they would be at the highest level of the organization, not just paid at the highest level, but also, shown their worth in their in decision making. And unfortunately, what I see over and again is that regardless of how progressive your message is about your organization, and I'm talking about more oppressive systems, generally what happens is that oh, I'm hearing myself. I don't like, yeah, okay, thank you. Generally what happens is that there's a lot of fanfare around how important it is, but there's not actual structure to support and show that like and not everybody with lived experience wants to lead, has the skills to lead, right? But there are ones that do and really have insight that no one else will be able to have. And unfortunately, unless you start to hide your lived experience and start kind of playing the game to get yourself up there, there's just very little ways for you to help shape and form and change. I'm talking about like radical change, not small incremental changes. And I think that's a huge block, and that is stigma. That's lack of respect. That's superiority as well. That is the pedestal. That's the system pedestal. Oh, it can't be done like that. Like you're just young and excited, or like we've been around a long time. You said like some people need to retire. So this is what I'm talking about. Like like we've been around a long time. We know how things work. That's a worrying form of utilization of power, I think, which is superiority based on institutional knowledge, which isn't right, nor is it superior. But I think, unfortunately, that's kind of where we are.
And so we touched on the peer support piece, and I would like to say a little bit more like about serving the with the topic, right? Serving the underserved and oppressive systems with the reentry part. Like and I'm talking about prison reentry. I'm not talking about jail reentry. And I've had to educate so many people about that. Jail reentry and prison reentry are night and day. I'm telling you, they're night and day. And so like looking at prison reentry, people that when they get out, they get out with no social security card, right? They get out and sometimes the system just drop them off in a halfway house, Then when they do go to a halfway house, they paying anywhere from $600 to $800 a month. That blows people's minds. When I talk to people that's from outside of this area and tell them how much it costs to stay in a halfway house, they're like, "Are you freaking serious?" I'm like, "Yeah." And this is what people come home to from prison. It's like they set up to fail. You dig? An oppressive system, and not having their vital records. Like, to get a job, you got to have 2 forms of identification. And the case managers can be ordering that on the inside. The system is so, and it's so screwed up. It's like they don't. I wonder if they give a damn at all on the inside, because reentry should start before the last week before a person gets out. Like, they should be. They can. And I got a framework in place. I'm just waiting. But like, if you could have a peer support specialist connect with an individual within, let's say, 60 days of his release, connect with the case manager. The peer support's on the outside anyway, that can make way more connections than that case manager can making phone calls, right? So invest in that. They saved all that money with the Justice Reinvestment Act whenever they implemented post-release, and the best thing they could come up with was to hire a whole bunch more probation officers. They could use that same investment and put that into peer support specialists or community health workers and have them do the prison reentry, engage the people while they're on the inside. Let the case manager put the person on the phone in their office and talk to the peer support for about 20 minutes. And then next thing have them check in again within the last month, and making sure everything is in place. Reminding the case manager or having an MOA and MOU in place to where I can order, let's say I can order the Social Security card for the individual, so when they come home, they got all their vital records. Make sure there's continuity of care. You dig? If you was on some type of medication for your chronic illness, we can make sure you got an appointment by the time that first week when you get out at Mayheck or Winches or at Appalachian Mountain Community Health Center. You dig? We can have all this stuff in place before they get out, but they let them out and then they go scrambling. Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up and get a job. I gotta hurry up and get a job, because the halfway house people, y'all know what time it is. They like this here. Like, well, my money, you better get a job. You've been sitting around the house all day. Go get a job. That's what they run into when they get out. And so that system is super oppressive. And I've had to figure it out with folks, like serving the underserved. And that's the hard one, y'all. That's the one where I do need Buncombe County to invest in prison reentry. You know what I'm saying? It ain't that I'm trying to just eat myself, because like at the end of the day, I would like to be a part of the planning and have a seat at the table to talk about the gaps, because I've been doing the work. But I'm not saying, yeah, my organization got to get all of this money, because it ain't about that. It's about the people. You feel me? It's about the people getting the help that they need.
And that's why people with lived experience should be at the very highest level of decision making at government organizations. I mean, that was a perfect example, right? Because your education and your knowledge of your institutional knowledge of the system can't really put it like that, can't really put the priorities in place in the same way that you just did, So yeah, let's open it up to, I mean, it's kind of been open, but what are people's thoughts and questions?
I was just going to say, when you were talking about how like the things that you would hear people say about the clients they were serving behind the scenes. I ran the children's program at Domestic Violence Intervention Services in Tulsa for a year, and I would hear kind of the same thing. And I'm also curious what it wouldn't also solve to have people with lived experiences at the highest levels, because they're also going to be compassionate and passionate about what they're doing, and the level of burnout, I feel like, would be lower, and you wouldn't have people making the decisions who are calloused to things from working with them for so much time, like callous to issues, and from hearing the same story from the same woman over and over and over again, even though it's as valid with each client that they're talking to. Like, I'm curious how much that would just echo change through so many levels of like the way that our system shows up in any way,
Yeah, I think I mean, I am too, right? Like, and I think there's a couple of things, right? Like, the fact is that like working in the whatever field, if you're working with people, you're going to get infuriated sometimes, and that's okay. that's okay, right? It's not about not getting upset or annoyed or taking things personally sometimes. But what's the level of supervision when you come back, right? Like, how is, because I think a good, supervisor is able to kind of let you air that, but also not feed into it, right? And then start to coax out, wow, that must be tough, like that's got to be frustrating, right? And also like, pulling out like what the potential of that client is, right? Like I mentioned that like the better end of stigma, but it's still not a great end of stigma, is like treating people as if they're so fragile that they're going to break. And like part of my story was that some people said to me, Dan, you're like, and Philip mentioned this, the old timer in the DART program that looks at you and says, no, I can see better in you than that, quite sternly, like you're better than this, like, like that could see the potential and the power that I already had and help that kind of come out and grow. Like, I think that's good supervision. And unfortunately, was not always my experience, because, as a supervisor, you get frustrated. I mean, I did that for a while. But like, how am I self-caring so that I don't bring that temptation to just kind of like keep it going there? The other comment that I wanted to make about that was like, it was really interesting because when I was completely undercover, I'd talk about it, right? Like I'd talk about it, I'd pull people aside, but people sometimes would brush me off and say, oh, what's the big deal? What's interesting is that when we bought like 3 incredible powerhouses into the county government building who were in recovery as part of this new kind of pioneering effort, they were all of a sudden out with their recovery. And so some people kind of, people are careful around what they would share around them, but sometimes some things would slip out, right? Because they'd forget. And these, fantastic, incredible, like helping professionals with lived experience would call them out every single time with a lot of love, but also with a lot of truth mixed in there. And so like that had started to, I think that started to shift people's perspectives, a lot around substance use, but also around other challenges like struggling with parenting, right? Which if you're a parent, you've struggled with parenting, or if you haven't, like, tell me how, so like, but I would be curious to see if like, because it trickles in a hierarchical organization, it trickles down. So what if, at the very top, that was the culture, what if we called it out sternly, but with a lot of love, like,
Well, that's why I say, bro, like, and we could probably just agree to disagree, but like I just feel like peer supports don't belong in the system. Like they belong to work for peer-led agencies, man. And then you have that chance to have somebody. I mean, because if you're working for the system, how do they judge? How do they determine if you're ready for a certain level of leadership? They use their measures. They're not using recovery measures. You know what I'm saying? And so like I feel like Sunrise, for example, I feel like Sunrise is, that's one thing they're like killing the game with. Like I know people who work over there. You did one person one person that work over there was about to work over at the other spot. They ain't even call her back. You feel me? At all. You did. And so she over there killing the game. Recovery warrior, highly respected in the community, in different spaces. You know what I'm saying? Like she can go in different spaces, even in the courthouse. You know what I'm saying? She like that. And she over there, she's in the leadership position. It didn't take long to put her in that leadership position because they could see her and determine what it was that she brought to the table. If she would have been working inside the system, that wouldn't have happened. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like,
the time isn't now. The time isn't now, or I'd still be there. Right? Like, come on. The time isn't now. But like that's my like long-term hope is that the government would be run by someone who knew what they were talking about,
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not saying know what they were talking about, like know what they're talking about.
I'm scared,
that's
bro.
the dream, but
like,
very idealistic and naive. I can appreciate.
Yeah, I'm just my thing is I'm just a little scared for my people. Like I'm overprotective. I'm that friend.
And you should
I'm
be.
that
And you
friend
should be.
that you say we going to the club. I'm that friend that's gonna make sure we good when we in the club, watching out, seeing what all's going on, because I'm watching out for you. That was me. You feel me? And I'm like that with my peers because I know what qualifies you. You feel me? Your recovery qualifies you. That means you done been to hell. That means you done hit the bottom. That means you done been towed up from the floor up. And I don't never want you to get back there. So I'm gonna try to protect you from situations. I'm gonna try to protect you from hostile work environments. I'm gonna try to protect you from toxic relationships. You know, especially if you close to me, if you my peer, you did. And so that's why I'm just so hesitant, man. And I don't know, bro. Like, if the system will ever be ready for that level of it, because there are certain
No, I don't think
that a social worker has to do. Like, there are some things that a social worker has to do that they will always have to do, and they will always bump heads with the peer support forever, because that is what the social worker has to do, bound by their freaking, what are they called? Naws. What y'all got, naws or something like that? All them little things y'all got going on that tell y'all certain things you got to do. But a peer support coming there ready to love on you, tell you their story and everything. Meanwhile, the social worker's like, shit, I ain't even gonna tell you I had gas last night. I ain't telling you nothing about me. You know what I'm saying? Ain't none of your business. Counter-transference and dual relationships. You dig?
There's a question in the chat that says, how do we in the system partner with peer support then?
The way that this is going on with like I said, Sunrise, I mean, they got contracts to do certain things. You did, like, and they doing it. You feel me? Like, at one point in time, Sunrise was inside the Justice Resource Center. Like, let's think back now. Well, how long ago was that? About 2 years ago? They had peers working inside the courthouse like that, and so I don't know why. I can't speak on why everything changed, but I know what my experience was like. You know, I know what my experience was like. I don't know if that was it. So I would say, when it comes down to partnerships, contracting to work out, depending upon what it is. Now, with that thing with the Child Protective Services and that program that they used to work for and everything, I don't have the answers for that. But when we start talking about reentry, and we start talking about diversion, and we start talking about prevention, you dig, stuff like that, I would say contract it out and don't have it housed inside.
And if it is, then it is a challenging question, right? Because, and it's a challenging one for me to answer because I left, right? And so clearly, if I had the answer of how to do it better, maybe, or had been successful in doing that, that would have been different. But I think that if you look at it, like, we enjoyed like 4 years of like a well-oiled machine, you know, that worked really, really well. And during those times, I suppose I could say, like, what was the important thing about that? Relationships always came first. There was no hierarchy. There was no one that had better knowledge than anyone else. We all brought ourselves to the table, right? And we all had really fucking good boundaries at the same time. You know, like, people think that if I bring myself and if I start to like love the people that I work with, I have bad boundaries. Don't talk about my program like that. I've got really good boundaries, you know, and it's because of those boundaries that I allow myself to really give myself wherever I am, including at work, right? Because I know who I am, right? And I think that oftentimes there is these power differentials that happen, you know, and so someone might feel very appreciated because you're saying positive things about them, but how appreciated are they in their salary? You know, like, how appreciated are they in their opportunities? How appreciated are they when they say, hey, this isn't working, and it stays the same, you know? And I think that as that struggle carried on, the reason that I think we're able to do, you know, really good work for such a long time was that we were relational first. So we allowed ourselves to talk about those very issues openly. And so, you know, Philip, when you were saying, you know, you're protective, you know, it takes protecting that over, you know, the documentation being in on time, or like, people getting seen in the right place at the right time, right? Because if you know who you are, you're going to do, if you know who you are and this makes you, this kind of work makes you come alive, you're going to be a monster out there. Like, I mean, monster in a good way. Like you're going to be crushing, you know. But, you know, when people are telling you what to do, it kind of gets in your way, you know, like, I think a thing that was really convicting for me about the work that I just got done doing was that, like, when we focused on relationships, I call it pay the piper, right? Like our numbers looked fantastic. They look better than most other people's numbers, you know, including all the details. Because when you focus on relationship and when you're ensuring that you know who you are and that you're coming alive in the work, the rest falls in place, you know. But when you're focusing on the numbers and the structure to get you there, which is unfortunately what often happens, then like everything either looks stagnant and good or fairly good. I don't know if good is a good term, or it just kind of falls apart. And, you know, retention is hard and like all the other things, burnout is high, you know, and people forget, you know, why they got, you know, why they started in the first place.
Yeah. And
so
there's other areas too, like to the question I see in the chat, as far as like how do we partner? So there are other areas that are doing it that way too. Like in Charlotte, they got PRN, Promise Resource Network, Peer Voice. North Carolina, they have Therapeutic Solutions. And you know, Winston-Salem, they got some stuff going on, and that I'm pretty sure they just contracted out. You know, not and it's not like, I'm not saying that it's like a cookie cutter way of doing it either, man, because I want to be careful because different areas can be different. Like, to be honest, I'm in Western North Carolina. You know, I'm a Black man who is outspoken and bold with a background who, you know what I'm saying? Like, who has some community support and influence. So that's scary to Western North Carolina, to the good old boy system. I may have had a whole different experience if I was living in Charlotte, if I was living in Greensboro, if I was living in Raleigh. You know what I'm saying? I might not have had the same type of experience that I had in Western North Carolina. Now, and I'll also say, like, now with that program, with that START program, you know, dang, I was trying to keep from saying the name of the program, but with that, like, that program is so unique to where it's like you just gotta go with the flow, and if something, you know, and fix what's not right with it. Like, I was crushed to see how things are ending up. Like, that was like heartbreaking. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was on a panel with them, yo, like a perinatal. We did a little thing. We did a little panel, man. We rocked it out. We had people from all over the state, man. I felt like a celebrity in that mug. What? You know what I'm saying? Like, and we was in there talking about recovery and different pathways of recovery and sponsorship and mentorship and how the peers are educating the social workers and vice versa. And you know what I'm saying? It was a beautiful thing, but let's be real. Like, where else do they got START program? I mean, where else do they got those kind of programs? And if they are working well, what are they doing?
And the START program is all over the nation, and, you know, it works well and it struggles at times in different places. But where it works well, the national team always talks about embodying the spirit of START, right? Which is recovery culture. And so, like, that's the answer and the solution. And so, like, Ashley, to answer your question, like, really specifically, right? Like, how do we in the system partner with peer support? Is like, see them, but also allow yourself to be seen, right? Like, it's like having their back like that, and letting them have your back too, right? I mean, I think, like, networking is one of the best ways to kind of push together, right? Like, I you know, like, the way that I think successful grassroots programs, like, stake out their ground and, like, push for, like, change that lasts is because they have support from advocates, you know, community partners, you know, the public, like, all those kind of things, right? So, like, if the system is open momentarily, just for a little while, to change something, you need to get a lot of people up in that stuff to to like support the effort, but then also to hold it accountable, right? And START might be a success. I hope that it is in Buncombe County. It needs to be. And we created a network with many different organizations and many different levels of support that hopefully will continue to carry that flag forward. And I believe that they can do it. I hope that they can too. And so I think that, you know, again, like, you know, in many different recovery programs, you know, like it's not, you know, acknowledging that this isn't a journey that you walk alone. You know, your recovery is not a journey that you walk alone. So if you're going to bring the culture of recovery to different organizations, you can't do that alone. You know, you need to have support. And, you know, I think, Coop, you and I talked about this, it was maybe about a year ago or so. And I was, you know, I was frustrated at the time. And I think as I was talking, I was like, well, you know what, like, why am I expecting the government to be working a program? You know, because like that sometimes when you get into, you know, recovery, which can mean many different things, right? And working a program can mean many different things. But when you're working towards well-being in a holistic way and really, you know, doing the work, like it can be kind of tempting to take everybody else's inventory and like criticize everyone else as though they're doing it too, when like clearly they're not. But you know, like it's interesting. On my drive over, I'm you know, not at my house, and I drove over, and there was a beautiful mural that says, you know, reparations, like cut the check now or something. And you know, I was thinking about like the reparations that you make when you get into recovery, right? The amends, and thinking about like, you know, the philosophical, like not a concluded thought, so it might not be a good one, but you know, what would it be like if like it was worked from a kind of recovery program perspective to make amends for the wrongs that were done? You know, what would that look like? Because it wouldn't be showy, right? But it would be right. You know, it would be absolutely right. And but it comes, you know, like in the 12 steps, the amends steps comes number 9 out of 12, right? There's a lot of work that happens before it, you know. And so when we jump ahead of ourselves and try and apologize and like, you know, pay back or make reparations when we haven't done our work, it don't kind of come out right. So I'm not sure, like, you know, you know, what, you know, if there's anything good out of that comment, but I made it. What else?
I have so many thoughts, and I love everything that y'all are saying, and I have so much to learn. One thing that just made me think, or something that your comment made me think about, Dan, is just the acknowledgement that like it doesn't have to be this way, and whether we look back or look forward, like there's other systems that we can create. And so I would just like love to hear y'all's thoughts about, you know, what does that look like? You touched on it in several different ways, with like peer support being outside of the system. What are some other things that y'all see that, you know, we can change for the better that some might see as like not possible?
I like authentic community engagement, right? So I'm in a couple of rooms, but one that I'm in is, well, with the Safety and Justice Challenge, in which Buncombe County, we've gotten a pretty penny from the MacArthur Foundation, you dig. And one of the things we talked about today in the meeting was just talking about like authentic community engagement. What I said was we need to make sure we got with like leaders from the community that aren't the people that we always are around, you know, because I know, like, I'm in recovery, and in Western North Carolina, there's not a lot of young Black people in recovery. So I am a lot of white folks is one of the few of their Black friends, just to be real. You dig? I'm one voice. I'm not the all-knowing voice. you know, and so just, and that same thing applies to like the system. Like whenever we're talking about racial equity, or we're talking about the racial disparities in the mental health workforce, or the lack of diversity in the mental health workforce, or we're talking about the achievement gap, like we have to make sure that we get like with those boots on the ground people, Jordan, you know what I'm saying? So like sometimes it might not be like the traditional RFP to fund something. Maybe you get out in the community and see who's really doing what. You know what I'm saying? And it's not hard to find out who's really leading in the community, you know, and that's some of the things I feel that needs to happen is we got to start undergirding some of those folks who aren't in the rooms, who aren't who don't talk the same, who makes you uncomfortable. Because I know I make people uncomfortable, but I stay uncomfortable. Like, I'm sorry. I stay uncomfortable. I don't fit in nowhere I go. I don't fit in with black people. I don't fit in with white people. I don't fit in with rich people, poor people. I'm just me. You feel me? And so like I'm to the point now that y'all, not y'all, but now that people are actually giving a damn about black people, hello, how you doing? What you want to talk about? Because this is what I've been talking about. You know, like some folks all of a sudden, like there's some opportunistic black folks. You dig? And some of them are in every room and every daggone grant letter of support and everything. It's like, okay, like, do you really think that this person is doing all of those things? Is that realistic to think that they can do all that stuff? Or are you just checking a box? So, you know, we could go on and on about that, but my main thing to answer your question, bro, would be to say, you know, make sure we're getting proximate. Like Brian Stevenson said when he came up here, he was the one, the death row attorney. He was talking about proximity. You did. So getting proximate with the community.
I love the RFP, like what you said about there's a lot there, right? Like that's how we do things. Like we don't go around and say like, who are you? It's like, what's the quality of your ability to put this on paper and promise something specific, you know, like in a very white male way, really, because that's how this system was built, right? Like and so like when you think about like, you know, people that are doing the work, especially like, you know, and having to do that, it's like you constantly feeling like you're having to deny yourself the work to get the money to do the work. So you're constantly begging for scraps. Your question is a really good question, Jordan. And like, I'm taking some time to reflect on it, to be honest, right? Like that's exactly what I'm doing with my life right now. I don't know what's going to happen. Right. So I'm like digging deep because I think we must find an answer because it mustn't carry on like this. And I think for so long, like, I think that my impression was that like, well, this is the way that it is. So I need to learn to play the game. Why? Why?
Yeah. And I also say, speaking up, like I'm telling you, in this room, it's a whole bunch of young folks in here. You know what I'm saying? It's our time, y'all. It's time. It is our time. It's time for the purge. No, I'm just kidding. But for real, this is our time. Like everybody is asking challenging questions now. Like, do it. Like if you sitting in that freaking meeting and what they said don't make no sense, say, hold on. I don't know if I agree with that. Like, and if you're scared, do it scared. And call me. Call me when it's over. I'll pour into your spirit. Hallelujah. You know what I'm saying? But it's time.
I'll tell you, call him before you say it, because like he'll give you the guts to say it. He will. He has. But like, so that again, so that is, I know, a absolutely necessary component of the change is the network, right? Is creating a network of people, not that all agree, but who are able to raise concern in a unified voice and able to be persistent and persevere with that, right? Like, and not let up, right? Diplomacy is okay, right? I think that when Bex asked me for a quote to put on one of the flyers, I'm not sure, I was having my coffee and it was like my third day free. And I was like, how about this one? I think diplomacy is okay, but when it starts diluting the message of the people, then watch out. Watch out, because you're compromised. You know, like, it's better not to be diplomatic and speak up than it is to be diplomatic and dilute the message and become systemized. Now, you might disagree with that, and that's okay. And I might have a different opinion on that in a couple of days or a couple of years, but I really feel pretty good about that right now in this moment, saying that. Because ultimately, like, what I want to do with my life is be okay with how I lived it, right? And be okay in the moment. And so I think, like, we live in a world where I think when you raise a concern, everybody starts looking at you sideways, because everybody's insecure and doesn't know who they are. And if you're raising a concern, like, they take it personally. But I think that, like, that's not a reason not to raise a concern. And if you raise it with enough people, and if you find a gentle and assertive enough way to do it and stay true to yourself, I think eventually the message will push the needle, we'll keep pushing the needle forward, right? And I think what's also really important for me, Jordan, as I consider all these, is that I'm having fun, right? Like, there's a quote, I think it's by Henry Thoreau. I've been quoting it for years, so it might be someone else. Look it up if it's not the right person, but it's one of my favorite quotes. Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because the world needs more people that have come alive, right? And so, like, in a way, that to me speaks to me a little bit about calling, right? Like, if I'm having fun and if I feel like I'm thriving and I'm alive, then maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think that serving the underserved in oppressive systems, for me, makes me come alive, you know, because then I get to connect with people like a lot of people in this room, right? Like, and I love that. I love the fight for the underdog, you know?
Yeah, that say something about y'all too. That came in here. You know, that says something that y'all even came. You know, whether it was out of curiosity. I know you didn't come just for the CEU. You know, if I would have said, man, I had people hitting me up talking about, you know, how to get in. It was too late, but then there was like some seats that came available today, but I ain't have time to follow up with those folks. But, you know, being working inside the system, staying charged up, charging your battery, you know, we can go back to like the self-care piece, because you know, people ask me how I'm doing. I say I'm fighting a good fight, because it is a fight, y'all. Like, the work we do is a fight. Whether we helping people who are fighting their damn self inside their head, trying to stop using, or trying to stop behaviors that are leading to using, or whether they, you know what I'm saying? Like, we fighting. We helping people fight their damn self, because the biggest fight we got is up here. And that's for people that's in or outside of recovery. It don't matter if they're in recovery a lot. The biggest fight we fight is between our ears, you dig? And we are like as counselors, as peer supports, we like Mickey off Rocky. Get up, you son of a you know what I'm saying? That's us. So it's always fighting. So we gotta stay plugged in with other people that energize us too. You know, and whenever we burn out, you just check out and go on to the next one. You know, because I don't know, man, if we're gonna ever be able to change the system. Because I heard many people quote it. Like, I used to say it was broken, but then like Brother Keenan Lake used to say, you know, the system ain't broken, it's working exactly how it was intended to work. And so with that being said, like, I don't know if we ever change that, but we will be able to continue to create initiatives and coalitions outside of the system that will be able to help the people that the system are not able to help with their methodologies. And hopefully the system will continue to be able to fund us, because they the ones that do got the bag. I mean, we understand they got the bag now. We got to make we just got to make sure we got some woke folk that's putting out the RFPs. Hello.
Or change the whole RFP system.
Change that whole
Yeah, change that.
We're working on it.
Yes. Okay.
And also, I just have to say, as a peer, you know, I just got recertified. I can't do peer work because, like, in the system, they didn't honor my best quality, which was my recovery. You know, my last peer job, I was designing peer systems, managing peers, and I was told I would never get a raise. I'd maxed out. I didn't have a degree, and I was a peer. I made top of the line. And what broke the back is I said, well, at least hire a peer for my peers so they don't have to go to HR. And they wouldn't do it. And I just left. I was like, I can't do that. They're setting those people up to fail.
Man, emphasis on what he said. hire a peer for his peers so they wouldn't have to go to HR. Peers are HR. That's what we are. We are supportive employment at all times. You know, before the EAN, before there's something that pops off, we are a supportive employer. That's our lifestyle, you did. So yeah, I love that. Like having a peer in place to provide that, or you know, that's what Upskill blew up for doing. Like when I was working at the college, that, you know, Upskill is a peer support program for people getting out of prison. And so the way that I would describe it to like HR professionals, I would tell them like, we're the supportive employment. We are the EAN before something pops off, and that's what we do. And any company that's hiring peer supports, they need to have like a triple OG peer that they're going to, you know, period. Because it's certain things like we gonna have to talk about, because it's hard. Like when you're working inside the system, man, for people that ain't peer supports, it's hard working inside the system. Look at the turnover in child support. Any of y'all see how they got turnover for the people that work in the child support office in the courthouse? You know what I'm saying? It's hard to work inside the system in these places and have to be the one that provides the bad news. You know, it takes a certain type of person to always provide bad news anyway. Can I get an amen? Like, shit, you start being like, damn, I don't never get to get no good news out. I need another job, you know?
I guess I would just what you're speaking to a lot, and I know Dan and I have had this conversation, but it feels like at this point the system's not going to go away, right? And so if you're working in the system, what I guess allows me to keep integrity to some level and pay my bills is just knowing that the system's going to be there. And if I can be in that system and advocate from a certain perspective and have those difficult conversations, then that makes me feel like I can have some integrity.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Like it needs people like you, right? Like it needs, and there's so many fantastic, amazing people that work in all sorts of oppressive systems, right? Like, and you need people on the inside and on the outside. I think the biggest question that I asked myself is, because I felt like I did a tour, right? And maybe I'll do a tour somewhere else someday. Never there again, sorry. But I think that it was because I felt really good about kind of being the renegade, the antagonist within the system. Like if the system doesn't have people that are willing to kind of take that mantle to do really good work that's like innovative, then it's going to be even worse than it is, right? So thank you for working there, right? Like, thank you for being in that. And for other people that are working in whatever system, like, you know, thank you. I think the question is like, just keep checking in with yourself, right? Like keep checking in with yourself. And, you know, if there are golden handcuffs, you know, what I mean is like promises of wonderful retirements and, you know, things that will come tomorrow. And then, you know, you're not promised tomorrow, like just, there's some good things about planning for our futures, but it shouldn't be at the top. It shouldn't have been at the top of my priority. It never was at the top of my priority. And I think sometimes that's how some of these, you know, big governmental systems kind of get you, is that they promise. And so you're like, well, I got to stay. I should shut up and just get my head down and do the work, because eventually I'll get paid out and I'll get life insurance for the rest of my life at 50, which is great. We should all have life insurance. Health insurance, you know, without having to, you know, like wait for it and maybe compromise our own integrity. So that just that question was really important for me to say. Sometimes I'd give myself 6 more months.
Well, I'm looking at our time and I'm thinking we probably have time for just some last remarks if you guys have them. I'm seriously so appreciative that you guys did this. I mean, what an amazing conversation. I hope these conversations are happening everywhere. You know, we've been talking over at Pivot Point about how we can I read some research recently that mindfulness isn't necessarily a concept that can just be blasted to every culture, like that it's something that works for everyone. And that really blew our minds because we didn't know that. And so we're trying to work on creating new, totally radical ways of approaching different cultures with our same mindfulness-based work right now. And I think it's a constant conversation of like, who should be telling us that, and how do we learn more, and how do we better engage with our community and all of our community. And I just really appreciate you guys taking the time to come and talk and share your wisdom, because that's what it was. And I really appreciate both of you. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'll just say, like, I'd love if anyone wants to reach out and just talk, about, because I think there's things that will come up after this. Maybe Bex has my number, I think. Yeah, she does. It was an honor to be part of this. And, I should have done this disclosure first, but like, I don't know, I was a bit nervous about kind of what to say or how to say it in the new kind of, the new kind of frame that I'm sitting in. And so I'm open to feedback too about it. But thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And just so y'all know, like, I gave y'all like my story in the shortest version possible, just to, to have an understanding of where the passion comes from. But with all that being said, I'm still here doing the same work. I'm just not doing it inside the system. And I have allies inside the system. You feel me? I still have some allies. And there are some good people that are working inside the system. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. That's why I pray. And I'm a religious man, so I believe in the power of prayer. It's always bigger than me. And so I'm praying for those people inside the system. I'm praying for my allies, because they gotta their fight is just as big as mine, because they're having to hold it in the road while they're on the inside. I couldn't hold it in the road without going off. You know what I'm saying? So we need our allies on the inside of the system as well. And I ain't going nowhere. That's a fact. Not today, one day at a time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you guys are welcome to send me an email and connect with Dan, or ask any questions or follow up about CEU credit. We're going to have Kevin Rumley speaking next month. He is the leader of the Veterans Treatment Court. And just like, I think if like a Hobbit and a superhero combined, this would be Kevin. So we would love to have you guys join us for that as well. And I appreciate you all being here right now. So I hope you have a great rest of your night, and I hope to see you again.